The flashbang grenades shattered the morning silence at exactly 5:47 a.m. Their white-hot bursts, illuminating the dew-covered cabins of Sunshine Valley Summer Camp, like lightning frozen in time. 8-year-old Marcus Chen, who had Down syndrome and loved collecting smooth riverstones, cowered behind his bed as armed figures in black tactical gear burst through the door, their boots thundering against the wooden floors. His screams joined the chorus of 32 other special needs children whose only crime had been waking up in their bunks on what should have been another peaceful Tuesday. 3 miles away, Karen Steinberg stood at her kitchen window, sipping her morning coffee from a porcelain cup adorned with pink roses. Her manicured fingers drummed against the granite countertop as she watched the black helicopters circle overhead like mechanical vultures. A satisfied smile played across her thin lips. Her call to the FBI's terrorism hotline at 11:23 p.m. the previous night had been remarkably effective. She had described, in vivid detail, how the camp counselors were conducting military-style training exercises, with vulnerable children being indoctrinated for terrorist activities. Her voice had trembled with practiced concern as she reported seeing suspicious foreign men visiting the camp after dark, carrying what appeared to be explosive devices. Dr. Sarah Martinez had been the camp director for 12 years, transforming 40 acres of abandoned farmland into a sanctuary where children with autism, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and other developmental disabilities could experience the joys of summer camp alongside their neurotypical siblings and friends. She had awakened to the sound of helicopter rotors and assumed a medical emergency had occurred. The sight of FBI agents zip-tying her hands behind her back while she wore her favorite pajamas, the ones with tiny rainbows that the kids always complimented, felt like stepping into a nightmare from which she couldn't wake. "Ma'am, we have credible intelligence that this facility is operating as a terrorist training center," Special Agent Rodriguez announced, his voice echoing through the main lodge where confused children huddled together like frightened animals. "We need you to remain calm while we conduct our investigation." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process the words. "This is a camp for special needs children. We teach swimming, arts and crafts, and basic life skills. These kids can barely tie their shoes, let alone—" Her protest was cut short as another agent guided her toward a waiting black SUV. The raid unfolded with military precision that would have been impressive under different circumstances. Agents swept through the art therapy cabin where construction paper turkeys and handprint paintings lined the walls. They photographed the adaptive sports equipment designed for children with mobility issues, noting in their reports the specialized training apparatus. The sensory garden, carefully planted with lavender and mint to help autistic children regulate their emotions, was documented as a potential chemical laboratory due to the presence of various plants. 12-year-old Emma Rodriguez, who used a wheelchair due to spina bifida and communicated through a tablet device, watched in terror as agents examined her communication board. Her tablet had been programmed with pictures representing her daily needs: bathroom, hungry, scared, happy, mom. To the agents, scanning for terrorist communications, the device looked sophisticated and potentially dangerous. They confiscated it, leaving Emma voiceless in a world that had suddenly become incomprehensible. The children were loaded into government vehicles with an efficiency that spoke to years of practice in genuine terrorism cases. Parents received phone calls from agents using phrases like national security threat and potential terrorist indoctrination. Maria Santos, whose 10-year-old son Diego had severe autism and hadn't spoken his first word until age 7, collapsed in her kitchen when she heard the news. Her boy, who spent hours arranging toy cars in perfect lines and who screamed if his morning routine varied by even 5 minutes, was now being transported to a federal interrogation facility designed for enemy combatants. The media descended on the story like starved wolves. By noon, news vans lined the country road leading to the camp, their satellite dishes reaching toward a cloudless sky. FBI raids, suspected terror training camp, disguised as children's facility, scrolled across television screens in 24-hour loops. Cable news pundits debated the sophisticated nature of using disabled children as a cover for terrorist activities, their voices dripping with manufactured outrage and genuine ignorance. Karen appeared on 3 different news programs that afternoon, identified only as a concerned local resident who wishes to remain anonymous for security reasons. Her face was digitally obscured, but her voice carried clearly as she described months of suspicious activity at the camp. I saw them conducting what looked like military drills. These poor children were being manipulated, used as human shields for a terrorist cell. Thank God I found the courage to speak up. The camp's board of directors, comprised of parents, medical professionals, and community volunteers, gathered in the conference room of the local library that evening. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across faces etched with disbelief and growing anger. Board President Jennifer Walsh, whose daughter had cerebral palsy and had attended the camp for 3 summers, struggled to maintain her composure as she read the FBI's preliminary report aloud. They're claiming the adaptive playground equipment represents obstacle course training for guerrilla warfare. The communication devices we use to help nonverbal children express their needs are being analyzed as potential encrypted communication systems. Jennifer's voice cracked as she continued reading. The sensory integration therapy room is described as a specialized interrogation chamber. Dr. Michael Foster, the camp's volunteer physician and a pediatric neurologist at the Regional Medical Center, removed his glasses and rubbed his temples. He had donated countless hours to the camp, helping develop individualized care plans for each child's unique needs. 30 years of medical practice, and I've never seen anything so grotesquely misrepresented. They're treating therapeutic interventions as terrorist tactics. Meanwhile, the children remained in federal custody at a facility 200 miles away. The interrogation rooms were designed for adult terrorists, not frightened children with developmental disabilities. 9-year-old Tyler Morrison, who had autism and severe anxiety, rocked back and forth in a corner, his hands pressed against his ears to block out the unfamiliar sounds. His usual comfort items, a weighted blanket and a small stuffed elephant named Peanut, had been confiscated as potential security risks. The first crack in the official narrative appeared 48 hours after the raid. Special Agent Lisa Chen, a 15-year veteran of the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit, had been reviewing the evidence collected from the camp. Her initial excitement at participating in what seemed like a major counterterrorism operation had gradually transformed into unease as she examined item after item that clearly belonged to a legitimate children's program. "Sir, I need to speak with you about the Sunshine Valley case," she said, knocking on her supervisor's office door. Agent Chen had built her reputation on meticulous attention to detail and an unwillingness to accept convenient narratives that didn't align with evidence. Supervisory Agent Williams looked up from his paperwork, his expression already defensive. The case had generated significant media attention, and any suggestion that the Bureau had overreacted would create substantial political complications. "What concerns you?" Chen. "The evidence doesn't support the terrorism allegations. We have children's artwork, medical equipment, and educational materials. The suspicious foreign visitors mentioned in the tip appear to be volunteer physicians from the local hospital's international program. Their explosive devices were actually emergency medical equipment." Agent Chen spread photographs across the desk, finger paintings signed with crayon scrawls, adaptive utensils designed for children with motor skill challenges, and therapeutic equipment that any pediatric occupational therapist would recognize immediately. Sir, I believe we may have been deliberately misled by the informant. The investigation into the source of the original tip began quietly, conducted by a small team of agents who understood the potentially explosive implications of their findings. Phone records revealed that Karen Steinberg had made 7 calls to the FBI terrorism hotline over a 3-week period, each time providing increasingly dramatic details about the camp's alleged activities. Agent Rodriguez, who had led the initial raid, felt his stomach turn as he reviewed Karen's property records. Her real estate development company, Steinberg Holdings, LLC, had submitted preliminary plans to the County Planning Commission for a luxury residential development called Valley Vista Estates. The proposed location required the acquisition of several parcels of land, including the 40 acres currently occupied by Sunshine Valley Summer Camp. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place with sickening clarity. Karen had attempted to purchase the camp property 18 months earlier, offering Dr. Martinez what she considered a generous sum. When her offer was rejected, she had launched a systematic campaign to discredit and ultimately destroy the camp's reputation. Her accusations to the FBI represented the culmination of a carefully orchestrated plan to eliminate the only obstacle to her multi-million-dollar development project. Back at the federal facility, the psychological toll on the children had become impossible to ignore. Child psychologist Dr. Amanda Rivera, brought in to assess the detained children, found herself facing a crisis that challenged every principle of her profession. These children, already vulnerable due to their disabilities, had been subjected to trauma that would require years of therapy to address. We have children exhibiting symptoms of severe post-traumatic stress disorder, she reported to facility administrators. They've regressed significantly in their developmental progress. Some of the nonverbal children who had been making communication breakthroughs have completely withdrawn. This detention is causing irreparable harm. The first domino fell when Agent Chen's report reached the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility. The second fell when parents began filing federal lawsuits, represented by civil rights attorneys who recognized the case as a catastrophic violation of due process. The third fell when Dr. Rivera's psychological assessments were leaked to the press, revealing the extent of trauma inflicted on innocent children. Karen watched the news coverage from her home office, surrounded by architectural plans and financial projections for Valley Vista Estates. Her initial satisfaction had curdled into growing anxiety as reporters began asking uncomfortable questions about the original tip that had triggered the raid. She had covered her tracks carefully, using a prepaid phone and providing only verbal reports that couldn't be directly traced to her. But the FBI's counterintelligence specialists were skilled at unraveling deception, especially when motivated by the prospect of avoiding a congressional investigation into their botched operation. The breakthrough came when Agent Chen noticed a pattern in Karen's phone calls. While the calls had been made from different phones, the background noise in each recording contained identical elements: a grandfather clock chiming on the hour, a particular wind chime melody, and the distant sound of traffic from a specific highway intersection. These audio fingerprints, combined with cell tower triangulation data, led investigators directly to Karen's neighborhood. On a gray Thursday morning, exactly 2 weeks after the raid, Karen answered her doorbell to find Agent Rodriguez standing on her welcome mat. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was now investigating the woman whose false report had made him complicit in traumatizing dozens of innocent children. Ms. Steinberg, I'm Agent Rodriguez with the FBI. We'd like to speak with you about some phone calls made to our terrorism hotline regarding Sunshine Valley Summer Camp. Karen's carefully constructed facade began to crack. I don't know what you're talking about. I was simply being a good citizen, reporting suspicious activity in my community. Ma'am, We have evidence suggesting that you deliberately provided false information to federal law enforcement agencies. That's a felony that carries a potential sentence of 25 years in federal prison. Agent Rodriguez's voice was steady, professional, but Karen could see the disgust in his eyes. The news of Karen's arrest spread through the community like wildfire. Parents who had spent 2 weeks in agony, wondering if their children would ever recover from their traumatic ordeal, felt a mixture of relief and rage. The woman who had orchestrated their nightmare had a face, a name, and a motive rooted in nothing more noble than corporate greed. The children were finally released after 16 days in federal custody, but they returned to a world forever changed by their experience. Marcus Chen, who had once eagerly participated in group activities, now refused to leave his mother's side. Emma Rodriguez's communication had regressed to basic gestures. Her trust in the technology that helped her speak shattered along with her tablet screen. Tyler Morrison required round-the-clock supervision, his anxiety manifesting in violent outbursts whenever he encountered anyone in uniform. Dr. Martinez stood in the ruins of her life's work, surveying the damage done by the FBI raid. The camp's buildings remained intact, but the program's reputation lay in shambles. Insurance companies balked at providing coverage, volunteers withdrew their support, and parents questioned whether any place could truly be safe for their vulnerable children. The turning point came during a packed town hall meeting at the local high school gymnasium. Parents, community members, and elected officials gathered to address the crisis that had torn through their small town like a tornado. The atmosphere was electric with barely contained emotions as people struggled to process the magnitude of Karen's deception and its devastating consequences. Mayor Patricia Hernandez opened the meeting with a statement that reflected the community's collective sense of betrayal. "We are here tonight because one person's greed led to the traumatization of 32 innocent children. We are here because an institution that represented the best of our community was destroyed by lies and manipulation." Jennifer Walsh, the camp's board president, took the microphone with tears streaming down her face. "My daughter Emma loved this camp more than anywhere else in the world. It was the one place where she felt normal, where her disability didn't define her limitations, but her possibilities." Karen Steinberg didn't just attack a summer camp. She attacked our children's right to joy, to community, to hope. The room erupted in applause that continued for several minutes, a release of emotion that had been building for weeks. When the noise subsided, Dr. Foster stood to address the crowd. His voice shook with controlled anger as he spoke about the medical miracle he had witnessed at the camp: children making breakthroughs in communication, mobility, and social interaction that traditional therapy settings couldn't achieve. Karen Steinberg called these children terrorists. "Let me tell you what I saw in these supposed terrorists. I saw Michael, who has cerebral palsy, take his first independent steps in the camp pool. I saw Sophia, who is nonverbal, use sign language to tell her first joke. I saw Jamie, who has severe autism, hug another child for the first time in his life." Dr. Foster paused, composing himself before delivering his final statement. Karen Steinberg didn't just attack a camp. She attacked the fundamental principle that every child, regardless of disability, deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to reach their full potential. That makes her the real terrorist in this story. The crowd's response was thunderous, but it was interrupted by an unexpected voice from the back of the gymnasium. Karen Steinberg herself had entered the meeting, accompanied by her attorney, an expensive-suited man who looked profoundly uncomfortable with his client's decision to appear in public. "I have something to say," Karen announced, her voice cutting through the sudden silence. The crowd turned as one, their collective gaze focusing on the woman who had caused so much pain. Some parents moved protectively closer to their children, as if Karen's presence alone posed a threat. "I made a mistake," Karen began, but her words were immediately drowned out by a chorus of angry voices. "You destroyed our children. 32 kids traumatized for your profit. You're a monster." Mayor Hernandez called for order, but the crowd's anger was beyond her control. Karen stood her ground, her face flushed with a combination of embarrassment and defiance. When the noise finally died down, she continued her statement, but her words revealed no genuine remorse, only concern for her own legal situation. "I believed I was protecting the community from a potential security threat. The information I provided was based on my observations and concerns about activities that seemed suspicious to me. I never intended for children to be harmed." Maria Santos, Diego's mother, stood up from her seat in the middle of the gymnasium. Her small frame seemed to grow as she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of maternal fury. "You lie. You knew exactly what those children were, innocent babies with disabilities who needed our protection. You used their vulnerability as a weapon for your greed. My son Diego spent 3 years learning to trust people outside our family. 3 years of therapy, patience, and love to help him feel safe in the world. You destroyed that in 16 days. He wakes up screaming every night, afraid that men in masks are coming for him again." Maria's words struck Karen like physical blows. For the first time since her arrest, Karen seemed to grasp the human cost of her actions. But her response revealed the calculating mind that had orchestrated the entire scheme. "I understand you're upset, but we can't let emotional responses cloud our judgment about national security priorities." The gymnasium fell silent at Karen's words, the audacity of her statement stunning even her harshest critics into momentary speechlessness. Then, Dr. Martinez, who had remained quiet throughout the meeting, walked to the microphone with the measured steps of someone who had found her voice. "Mrs. Steinberg, I want to share something with you and everyone here tonight. When the FBI agents zip-tied my hands behind my back, they asked me if I had any last words for the children before they were taken away. Do you know what I told them?" Dr. Martinez's voice remained steady, but tears ran freely down her face. "I told them that no matter what happened, they were loved. I told them that their disabilities made them special, not dangerous. I told them that somewhere, somehow, people were fighting to bring them home. You took that promise and turned it into a lie. Mrs. Steinberg, you made me a liar to children who trusted me to keep them safe. That's not a mistake, that's a choice. That's evil." Karen's attorney tugged at her sleeve, urging her to leave before she said something that would further damage her legal case. But Karen seemed compelled to defend her actions, even as the weight of community condemnation pressed down upon her. "You people don't understand the complexities of modern security threats. I made a judgment call based on the information available to me. The fact that it turned out to be incorrect doesn't make me a criminal." Agent Rodriguez, who had been observing from the side of the gymnasium, stepped forward to address Karen directly. His presence in uniform caused several children to move closer to their parents, a reaction that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the room. "Mrs. Steinberg, you made 7 separate calls to our terrorism hotline over 3 weeks. Each call contained increasingly detailed fabrications about activities at the camp. You described military training that never occurred, foreign visitors who were actually local physicians, and explosive devices that were medical equipment. That's not a judgment call, that's a deliberate campaign of deception." Agent Rodriguez paused, his own voice heavy with the weight of his role in the disaster. "I led the raid on that camp because I believed your lies. I'm the one who had to look into the eyes of terrified children and tell them they were safe while we loaded them into government vehicles. I have to live with that for the rest of my life. And it's because of you." The federal prosecution of Karen Steinberg became a landmark case in the misuse of terrorism laws for personal gain. U.S. Attorney General Patricia Wilson personally announced the charges at a press conference in Washington, D.C., calling Karen's actions a perversion of the security systems designed to protect Americans from genuine threats. The charges were comprehensive: 7 counts of providing false information to federal law enforcement, conspiracy to defraud the United States, violation of civil rights under color of law, and domestic terrorism. The terrorism charge, rarely applied in cases not involving violence or explosives, was included because Karen had used the threat of terrorism to achieve her economic and political goals. During the trial, federal prosecutors painted a picture of a woman whose greed had no limits, whose willingness to sacrifice innocent children for profit revealed a complete absence of moral conscience. The evidence against Karen was overwhelming: phone records, financial documents showing her development plans, and testimony from dozens of witnesses who had observed her growing obsession with acquiring the camp property. The prosecution's star witness was Agent Chen, whose meticulous investigation had unraveled Karen's deception. She testified about the contrast between Karen's dramatic descriptions of terrorist activity and the reality of children's artwork and adaptive playground equipment that she had found during her evidence review. The defendant described military-style obstacle courses. Agent Chen testified, "What we found were therapeutic climbing structures designed to help children with motor skill development." She reported seeing explosive devices. "What we confiscated were automated external defibrillators and emergency oxygen tanks required by state regulations for children with medical needs." Karen's defense team attempted to portray her as a concerned citizen, whose reports, while incorrect, were made in good faith. They argued that the post-9/11 security environment had created a climate where suspicious activity should be reported rather than ignored. Their strategy collapsed when prosecutors introduced evidence of Karen's real estate development plans and her previous attempts to purchase the camp property. The most powerful testimony came from the children themselves, or rather, from the child psychologists who had worked with them during their recovery. Dr. Rivera described the lasting trauma inflicted on vulnerable children who had been treated as enemy combatants by their own government because of one woman's lies. These children will carry the scars of this experience for the rest of their lives. Dr. Rivera testified, "They were betrayed not just by Ms. Steinberg, but by the system that was supposed to protect them. Some may never fully trust authority figures again. Others have regressed years in their development. The psychological damage is incalculable." The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. As the foreman read the verdicts, Karen showed no emotion, but her attorney visibly slumped in his chair. The mandatory minimum sentence for domestic terrorism was 25 years in federal prison, but additional charges meant Karen faced the possibility of life imprisonment. Judge Rebecca Morrison, a veteran federal judge known for her measured approach to sentencing, delivered a statement that would be quoted in legal textbooks for decades to come. "Mrs. Steinberg, you have been convicted of using our national security apparatus as a weapon against the most vulnerable members of our society. You turned children's disabilities into evidence of terrorism. You transformed adaptive equipment into instruments of war. You perverted the very systems designed to protect us from genuine threats. Your actions caused immeasurable harm to 32 children, their families, and our community's faith in justice. More troubling, you showed no remorse throughout this process. suggesting you would commit similar acts if given the opportunity. This court sentences you to the maximum penalty allowed by law, life imprisonment in federal prison, without the possibility of parole. The community's response to Karen's sentencing was complex. While many felt justice had been served, others worried that no punishment could undo the damage done to the children and their families. The camp remained closed, its buildings empty monuments to innocence lost and trust betrayed. But from the ashes of Karen's deception, something unexpected began to grow. Dr. Martinez received a phone call from Senator Elizabeth Warren's office, followed by visits from congressional staff members who were drafting legislation to prevent similar abuses of terrorism reporting systems. The Sunshine Valley Act, as it came to be known, would require federal agencies to verify the credibility of terrorism tips before conducting raids involving vulnerable populations. More importantly, the federal government recognized its role in the disaster and committed to making amends. The Department of Justice established a $25 million fund to compensate the affected families and provide ongoing psychological treatment for the traumatized children. The Department of Health and Human Services announced plans to build a new, state-of-the-art facility for special needs children, with Sunshine Valley Summer Camp as its centerpiece. The groundbreaking ceremony took place on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after Karen's sentencing. Dr. Martinez stood before the assembled crowd, holding the shovel that would break ground for the new facility. Behind her, 32 children waited with their families, some still bearing the invisible scars of their ordeal, but all eager to reclaim the joy that had been stolen from them. Marcus Chen, now 9 years old and still collecting smooth river stones, had worked with his therapist to develop a statement he wanted to read at the ceremony. His words were simple, but profound, delivered in the halting cadence of a child with Down syndrome, but carrying the wisdom of someone who had survived unimaginable trauma. Bad lady tried to hurt us, but she couldn't break our hearts. We're still here. We're still special. We're still loved. Marcus paused, looking around at the faces of his camp family. This is our home now. Nobody can take it away again. As Dr. Martinez drove the shovel into the earth, the crowd erupted in applause that seemed to shake the very ground beneath their feet. The new Sunshine Valley Summer Camp would be more than just a recreational facility. It would be a testament to resilience, community, and the unshakable belief that every child deserves dignity, respect, and the chance to experience joy. Karen Steinberg began serving her life sentence at ADX Florence, the federal supermax prison in Colorado. Her cell, designed for the most dangerous terrorists and criminals, measured 7 feet by 12 feet, with a small window that showed only a slice of sky. She had achieved her goal of eliminating the obstacle to her development project, but the victory had cost her everything: her freedom, her fortune, and her place in a community that would remember her name only as a synonym for evil. The final chapter of the Sunshine Valley story was written not in a courtroom or a prison cell, but in the laughter of children who had learned to trust again. Emma Rodriguez, whose communication had regressed so dramatically after her detention, gave her first public speech at the camp's reopening ceremony. Using a new communication device provided by the Federal Compensation Fund, she spoke for all the children who had suffered and survived. We are not broken. We are not dangerous. We are not less than anyone else. We are exactly who we were meant to be. And this place helps us remember that. Karen tried to make us disappear, but we're still here. We're still shining. We're still sunshine. As the sun set over the new Sunshine Valley Summer Camp, casting long shadows across the adaptive playground and therapeutic gardens, the community gathered for a barbecue dinner that had become an annual tradition. Children with disabilities played alongside their siblings and friends, their laughter echoing across the valley that had once been the site of their worst nightmare. Dr. Martinez watched from the porch of the new administrative building, marveling at the resilience of the human spirit and the power of community to heal even the deepest wounds. 32 children had been traumatized by one woman's greed, but they had emerged stronger, surrounded by a support network that would never again allow them to be treated as anything less than the precious, irreplaceable individuals they were. The story of Sunshine Valley became a cautionary tale taught in law schools, ethics courses, and counterterrorism training programs across the country. But for the families who lived through it, it remained something simpler and more profound proof that love ultimately triumphs over hate, that community can overcome individual evil, and that children who are given the chance to shine will always find a way to light up the world around them. In her cell at ADX Florence, Karen Steinberg stared at the small rectangle of sky visible through her window and wondered if the children she had tried to destroy were laughing somewhere in the distance. She would spend the rest of her life wondering, but she would never know that they were not just laughing. They were thriving, protected by a community that had learned the hard way never to let fear triumph over compassion, never to let greed disguise itself as patriotism, and never to forget that the most vulnerable among us deserve our strongest protection. The new Sunshine Valley Summer Camp continues to serve special needs children from across the region, funded by federal grants and community donations. Karen Steinberg remains incarcerated at ADX Florence, where she will spend the remainder of her natural life. The children she sought to destroy have grown into young adults who advocate for disability rights and serve as living reminders that every person, regardless of ability, deserves dignity, respect, and the opportunity to shine.